Hey guys, today's topic that we're going to discuss is going to be percentages. So let's go over a few small things that we need to know first about percentages. All right, let's find first, before anything, let's find 10% or 25% of anything. 10%, we went over this a lot in class. 10% of anything is pretty easy. You just take a zero off the end. Or you make that a decimal, right? You would move the decimal one place to the left every single time. So that would be 10%. So let's do some examples of 10%. So 10% of 300 is just 30. 10% of 450 is simply 45, right? 10% of 620 is simply 62. That is 10%. Now, if you know 10%, you can find pretty much any other percent as far as it being tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Let's do 620, for example. So if it says, what is 10% of 620? We just found out that that would be 62, right? So if 10% is 62 and it's asking you for 70%, then what would you do with your 62? You could simply multiply that by 7 because 10 times 7 gives you 70%. And then you could multiply 62 times 7, and that would be your 70%. So 70% would be 434. Because to get from 10 to 70, you multiply by 7. So you would have to multiply by 7 here also. So it's easy to find the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, all the 10 percentages, 80%, 90%, if you can find 10. So if you can find 10, then all you have to do is multiply by that number and then do the same thing on the other side. So that's 10%. Same thing kind of with 25%. Let's look at 25%. So let's do 25% of 200, right? All right, if you know that 25% of 200, let's do it on a number line. That might be easiest for us. 200. If you know 25% of 200, then you can just mark it down. If you don't know 25% immediately, how would you find 25%? Well, the easiest way for me would be to start with 50. Always find 50% of the number. And then if you can find 50%, which is half, or divide that by 2, you can find 25% easy, right? What is half of 200? That would be your 50% mark. Half of 200 is 100, right? So now we know 50%. 50% is 100. How would we find 25% if we know 50? Well, you just take half of 50 because half of 50 is 25, right? So 25% would be half of whatever this number is. What's half of 100? That is 50, right? So now you've easily found out that 50 is 25% of 200. What about if they ask 75%? If they ask 75%, then we would have started by finding half, that's 50, and then we would have found 25%, which is half of 50%. But how do you get from 25 to 75%? How do you get from one to the other? 25 times 3 is 75%, right? So what would you do up here? Same exact thing. Multiply 50 times 3, and that is 150. So 150 is 75% of 200. And this is how you do your 25%, 50%, 75% of any number. We could do a harder number, for example, if you would like. All right, let's do 180. So 180, that here is 0. 180 is our 100%. Always put the percents on bottom. 180 is our 100%, right? And here's 0. We start by finding half. Half of 180, that's 50%, is 90, right? And then how are we going to find our 25%? Remember, Miss Blackwell told you that 25% is always half of 50, right? What is half of 90? Half of 90 is 45. Okay. And then how did I say that you would find 75%?